UN envoy is in Aden on a second visit during 2 months. Will he make a difference this time? Houthi rebels suffer heavy losses in Ma'rib while the governor vows defeat of the militia. The joint forces defend Houthi attacks in different fronts in Hodeidah. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English News with me, Shaza Abdelbei. The United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, is in Aden on a second visit to the city. The UN envoy met Yemeni Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and discussed latest developments in Yemen, including Houthi escalation in Ma'rib. More on the story is within this report.
In a second visit, after assuming his duties as a new United Nations envoy, Hans Grunberg met in Aden, the interim capital of Yemen, government officials to discuss the United Nations brokered peace plan. The talks discuss ways of ending the war in the country in light of the escalation of fighting from the part of the Houthi rebels, especially in Ma'rib. Grunberg is trying to push both parties, the government and the Houthis, to accept the United Nations peace plan that calls for achieving an immediate nationwide truce, including stopping the Houthi offensive in the central city of Ma'rib, opening Sana'a airport and lifting restrictions on Hodeidah seaport. Yemeni Prime Minister Main Abdel Malik affirmed his government's support for the efforts of the United Nations envoy to reach a political solution, despite the continued intransigence and rejection by the Houthi rebels, who are directed by their Iranian allies. Abdel Malik said, Houthi escalation in Ma'rib Governorate and the group's attacks threaten to complicate the scene in Yemen and will duplicate the human suffering. The government, according to the Prime Minister, will deal positively with the international efforts to bring peace, according to the three references that are locally agreed upon and supported internationally. Grunberg stressed the need to focus efforts towards urgent matters to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. The United Nations envoy expressed his great appreciation for the support of his mission by the Yemeni government and the cooperation it shows and its eagerness to establish peace. Grunberg's visit, however, will be useless, according to experts, if not coupled with solid international action to stop Houthi escalation and their continuous targeting of civilians. Now the question lies, will these repeated visits by the United Nations envoy contribute in saving Yemen from the hell of war and put an end to Houthi political, humanitarian and military violations? Time will tell.
For the first time, the United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen visits Taiz. The visit is to discuss humanitarian issues and to look into the crimes of Houthis in Taiz. More on the story is within this report.
United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg arrived in the city of Taiz in a first-hand visit to observe the situation. The visit is also the first for a United Nations envoy to Taiz. It came in order to form a comprehensive briefing on the general situation in the city.
We discussed issues facing Taiz, but also the situation elsewhere in Yemen.
Grunberg met with officials of the local authority, political parties, civil society organizations, and the private sector.
We focused on the humanitarian needs in Taiz. These needs that are related to opening of roads, the high prices for people, the absence of services. All these are the result of the war and the siege.
A photographic exhibition was organized to reveal the atrocities committed by the Houthi militias against civilians, in addition to the humanitarian violation in the West Coast. We set up this exhibition to reveal the crimes committed by Houthis against the civilian people in Taiz from 2015 to 2021. Citizens in Taiz confirmed their dissatisfaction with this late visit that comes after 7 years of war, siege and death.
The United Nations role is futile. The only role of the United Nations was in the Stockholm Agreement in Hodeidah. This agreement was for the interest of only one party.
Taiz is a city inhabited by more than 3 million people who suffer from Houthi crimes amid silence of the United Nations and the international community.
Prime Minister Ma'in Abdel Malik met U.S. envoy to Yemen Tim Litterking. The two parties discussed the latest developments in Yemen and international efforts to bring peace. In addition, they discussed efforts to support the government in facing the existing challenges in the economic and humanitarian aspects. Houthi militia renewed shelling populated areas in Ma'rib. The terrorist militia targeted a missile in a residential area in the center of the city. The shelling comes during Houthi escalation in Ma'rib for the past weeks, especially in Al-Juba and Al-Abdiyah districts. Dozens of Houthi members were killed and others wounded on the battlefronts in Ma'rib. Military sources said government forces and tribes targeted separate locations controlled by the rebels on the southern front of Ma'rib. Sources reported that the government shelling destroyed a number of Houthi war equipment and resulted in the death and injury of dozens of the rebels. Turning to Hodeidah, the joint forces destroyed Houthi launching pads into Haita. According to military sources, the joint forces spotted the causes of the rebels' artillery. The shelling destroyed Houthi sites, causing losses among them. Army forces and tribesmen thwarted Houthi militia attacks towards a strategic camp located in Al-Jawf, north of Yemen. Military sources reported that the militia launched violent attacks from several directions towards Khanjar camp, adding that the attack failed. The sources confirmed that the clashes between the government forces and the Houthis continued for hours. International agencies warn that 20.5 million Yemenis are without safe water and sanitation. As a result, Yemen has been facing mass outbreaks of diseases. More on the story is within this report.
As a result of the ongoing conflict in Yemen 7 years ago, and despite the living conditions that Yemenis are going through, there is a tragedy that is more severe than that. The fragile health situation puts the lives of millions at risk, and the difficulties in providing health services have become manifest in the deterioration of health outcomes. Reports dealing with the health situation of Yemenis indicate a deteriorating health situation amid the current conflict conditions. This includes high levels of child malnutrition, low immunization rates, and outbreaks of communicable diseases. The health of the mother and the child is particularly affected by the worsening situation. The latest estimates indicate that one mother and 6 newborns die every 2 hours. Moreover, the conflict has also caused direct damage to the health of the population. The war has become the third cause of death, after heart disease and newborn diseases, and the death rate has increased as a result by 70%. While there are 1.2 million pregnant or breastfeeding women and 2.3 million children under 5 who need treatment for acute malnutrition. The health system in Yemen relies a lot on external funding, and health services are provided primarily through organizations that implement health projects. However, the external financing of the health sector witnessed a significant decrease from previous years, which made the health system in Yemen vulnerable to severe risks. The World Bank indicated that the availability of functioning health infrastructure facilities such as hospitals and primary care centers has become hard to obtain during the conflict. According to the study, a large proportion of the population faces challenges in accessing health care, as only 50% of health facilities are working at full capacity, and more than 80% of the population face major challenges in obtaining food, drinking water, and healthcare services. The World Bank warned that internally displaced people who live in crowded informal settlements or densely populated neighborhoods on the edge of the cities are at high risk of outbreaks of infectious diseases and other health challenges, as there are 3.6 million IDPs across the country at present, including 700,000 people who live in more than 1,700 random sites scattered across the country with little or no services at all. The situation is dire for all Yemenis. They are deprived of their simple basic rights to live, and the only solution to this seems to be the end of this insane war.
Human rights sources reported that one of the prisoners inside Houthi prisons died as a result of torture. The sources added Jihad Saleh died as a result of brutal and torture in the prison. According to a latest government report, More than 300 victims lost their lives due to Houthi torture, and more than 1,400 prisoners were subjected to torture in the malicious prisons. Coming next, the World Bank warns that Yemen is surrounded by the risk of famine.
هذا هو محل استهداف الحوثي الذين استهدفوا المواطنين وهم نائمين. هذا هو الصاروخ. في الساعة 4 ماشينا الضربة من الحوثيين في المخيم. هذا يعني استشهدوا أولاد عمي، هذا استشهدوا يعني أخواني كلهم، يعني شوف يعني الدم في الخيم. الدم في الخيم يعني في كل مكان، يعني رؤوسهم ما التقوش، الرأس ما التقاش، الرأس ما التقاش.
Welcome back. The World Bank renewed its warnings of a large-scale famine hitting Yemen. Millions of people have been suffering nationwide. More on the story is within this report.
The head of the UN Food Agency is warning that 60 million people in Yemen are marching towards starvation and says food rations for millions in the war-torn nation will be cut in October unless new funding arrive. David Beasley said at a high-level meeting on Yemen's humanitarian crisis that the United States, Germany, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and other donors stepped up when the World Food Programme was running out of money early this year, and because of that, we averted famine and catastrophe. The World Food Programme is running out of money again, and without new funding, reduction will be made in rations for 3.2 million people in October and for 5 million by December, he said. But donors plucked less than half the amount, 1.7 billion US dollar, which the UN chief called disappointed. In the last 6 months, the total has grown to just over half the amount required. The Yemen director for Oxfam Charity, Mohsen Siddiqui, commented that donors who made plugged and expressed hope that funds will be quickly made available to aid organizations. World Food Programme, Mr. Beasley said, "We need to end this war, number one. And if donors are getting fatigue, we'll end the war." Henrietta Fore, head of the UN Children Agency, UNICEF, warned that Yemeni children could face the risk of death due to the shortage of food.
We consider it the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. 11 million children at risk. The problem is that the health system, the education system, the water and sanitation systems are all collapsing or have collapsed. So it's very difficult to get medicine.
On his part, Jens Lannersink, the EU Commissioner of the Crisis Management, called on the warning parties to grant unrestricted humanitarian access and allow food and fuel into the country, saying humanitarian needs are unprecedented and rising.
Is Yemen. Yemen is probably the worst humanitarian crisis that we have at the moment, with the largest number of people that are in need of humanitarian assistance, around 20 million. 20 million people in Yemen alone. So, and at the same time, we have war. We have war, a very ugly war going on. So, yeah, there should be a way to protect non-combatants, to protect civilians, especially the vulnerable groups, and move them to a safer place, to move them outside the conflict zone.
The U.S. Secretary of State urged donors to fulfill their pledge as quickly as possible and urged other nations to help fill critical funding shortfalls. Despite a relentless air campaign and ground fighting, the war has deteriorated largely into a settlement and swamped the world's worst humanitarian crisis. For how long will that continue? Nobody can really tell.
Shops in Abiyan closed their doors due to the collapse of the national currency. Tens of store owners have decided to suspend their market dealings as the sharp fall of the rial has made it hard for them to survive. More on the story is within this report.
Some shops in the city of Zanzibar, the center of Abiyan Governorate, closed their doors to citizens in protest against the deteriorating living situation and the accelerated collapse of the national currency against foreign currencies, which led to an increase in prices of food, consumer goods and oil derivatives. Some stores have closed partially, while dozens of wholesale and retail food stores have closed completely. While the owners of these stores attribute their reasons for the closure to the rise in commodity prices and the decline in purchasing power, as well as the instability of the currency exchange market.
Levies, high prices, along with the greedy merchants are all reasons for the high prices of food. Stores are now closed as merchants are complaining about high prices, and they hold the government responsible for that. We as citizens, there are many people who can't afford to buy food or other house demands. Therefore, we call on the government and the coalition to consider the citizens' situations, especially when their salaries cannot afford buying anything.
As you can see today, commercial shops have been closed for 2 consecutive days. This is because of the deterioration of currency. A bag of flour is for 28,000 rials. A bag of sugar is for 52,000 rials. The gallon of oil, which used to cost 1,500 rials, now it costs 10,000 rials. There are citizens whose salaries are 28,000 rials a month. This cannot even afford to buy one necessity item, and there are people who has no salaries at all.
The value of the rial collapsed against the dollar to more than 1,530 rials per dollar. This reflected negatively on some families who were forced to flee from the specter of death due to the huge increase in prices, and some of them were forced to beg to satisfy their hunger and cope with the high prices, the interruption of salaries, and the severe destitution of the requirements of life. On his part, Khaled Abbad, the journalist, also complained about the situation.
Abiyan Governorate, in particular, along with some other southern governorates, suffer from high prices of food and oil derivatives. This affects the citizens negatively as they suffer from poverty and famine. Nearly most of them are on the poverty line. Some of them can't afford to buy 2 meals a day, and 1 meal can't be enough for them. However, it can only quench their hunger.
In the event of the continuation of the miserable situation and the aggravation of difficult living conditions, we will see many families in the streets begging due to the absence of the government, who is most familiar of what's going on in the corridors of the life of the simple citizen. Therefore, we appeal to government and concerned authorities to solve this situation as soon as possible and save the citizens who can no longer bear these hard conditions.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 13 new cases of the COVID-19 in 5 governorates. The total confirmed cases are 9,883, including 1,909 deaths and 6,556 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The UN envoy is in Aden on a second visit during 2 months. Will he make a difference this time? Houthi rebels suffer heavy losses in Ma'rib while the governor vows the defeat of the militia. The joint forces defend Houthi attacks in different fronts in Hodeidah. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.